Bona tarda, good evening. I would like to welcome Peter Rich to the headquarters of the Colegio de Arquitectes de Catalunya, the House of Architects and Architecture in Barcelona. We are especially pleased to host you, and we appreciate your willingness to pronounce your lecture here, taking advantage of your visit to Spain. Agraeixo la vostra presència aquesta tarda. És un plaer per nosaltres comptar amb la presència de Peter Rich i que el seu coneixement pugui ser compartit. La conferència de Peter Rich s'emmarca dins de l'espai de difusió d'idees Tribuna COAC per facilitar i apropar als arquitectes i a tots els que professionalment o culturalment ens interessa l'arquitectura, l'urbanisme i la ciutat, les visions, propostes i actuacions de persones i institucions rellevants, amb responsabilitats, amb capacitat d'influència i decisió en l'àmbit de l'arquitectura i l'urbanisme. This conference is part of our new project, Tribuna COAC, whose main objective is the diffusion of ideas to facilitate and bring architects and all those who are interested professionally or culturally and love architecture, urbanism and the city, visions, ideas and actions of relevant people and institutions with responsibilities and ability to influence and decision-making in the field of architecture and urbanism. Peter Rich és un arquitecte reconegut internacionalment que ha rebut nombrosos premis, incloent el World Building of the Year del World Architectural Forum de Barcelona de l'any 2009. L'any 2010 és nomenat membre honorari de l'American Institute of Architects i també reconegut amb la medalla d'or del South African Institute of Architects, el guardó més prestigiós del país per a la seva professió. Peter Rich will talk about the work being carried out on Southeast Africa for the growth of the area. As co-founder of Earthlight Design, he is working on the design of sustainable solutions with local materials to promote the development of the building industry in South Africa, as well as in the design of housing for newcomers. Thank you for coming. Enjoy your stay in Barcelona. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, he will bring it. I will leave.
Have you got a... Oh, that's good. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for this privilege. As I was saying, this is my cell phone. I'm a supporter, okay? And I went to in Madrid, I went to Real Madrid dressed up in these colors and I didn't get killed, but it was fun. And we have a funny thing because when you support a team, I come from an English-speaking society. When your team's not doing well, you must give them more support, not less support. But I'm basically Catalan at heart. I gave a lecture in June in Pamplona as part of Pachi Mangado's called The Necessity of Architecture, and it was a journey, my architectural journey. And I'm not giving that tonight. I'm giving a different lecture tonight. I'm giving a lecture that I've been running a Master of Design and Architecture course in Pamplona. I was phoned at short notice when I was in Madrid a few weeks ago to run this course, and it's been intellectually very stimulating. I was a young student in apartheid's heyday, and I resisted the apartheid government. I became an activist, and instead of becoming a political activist and getting put in jail, I went and lived with the traditional settlements of Africans before the institutions got to them to learn about them as a society, and I've built a whole career on that. That's another lecture. And I learned the same lessons that you would learn if you went to Rome to do your Beaux-Arts training. That's a whole nother lecture. And what I've done here is, since '94, I taught for 30 years. We had we had Pancho Gedish as our head of school. He's the only living member of Team 10. Pancho Gedish brought the Allison and Peter Smithson to teach us. So that's one's background. And we were taught we were part of a fantastic school in Johannesburg. And then when 94 came and we became a democracy, we've started to work in Africa. And whereas I practice in a small practice, never more than 5 people here, there are 3 colleagues, one of them in Rwanda and one of them in Cambridge. And we formed a new company, Light Earth Designs, working in the East African context because we needed to be present, helping to define policy and commitment to sustainable development, working with the government, and challenges to our agenda, and case studies and projects. And this is my one colleague. He worked for Field and Clegg and Bradley in London for 11 years. Michael worked under John Uschendorf, who's just done the book on Guastavino at MIT. And he learnt from Catalans how to, as an engineer, he did engineering in an architectural school, so he's neither an engineer nor an architect, but that's an advantage. And then we're working together, and in our Rwandan office we have Anton Larsen, who's a young Catalan who, you get good students, then you get excellent students, then you get Anton Larsen. He's been working with us for a few years, and I mention him because he's an important part of the equation. Now this all started because we were crazy enough to build this building. We literally built it because the contractors didn't know what they were doing. And we've realized that if we do more of this work, we have to, like Eladio de Este, we have to become contractors. We don't use steel and we don't use cement. So we try and make it as low a carbon footprint as possible. And we try and work in that context. And then when we won the Earth Award in London, Prince Charles phoned us up and asked us if, working with the soil of his garden, if we could do this for the British public to walk through on when he has a tea party for them. And we did this in 3 weeks. We took my office over and we built it. And then recently, a billionaire in America who was born and bred in Afghanistan, he's not a usual gringo, he's very different. He does philanthropist work in Africa, and he's an advisor to Paul Kagame. He had to move into a space in Chicago, and he hates the corporate world. And he asked us if we could design an architecture that you could taste, you could smell, and you could touch, and he wanted it made from waste materials, and he wanted us to take the ceiling out, and he didn't want core 10. He wanted things to be rough, so you could see by the way they made. And what we did is instead of having blinds, we grew vines, and then we got beetle kill wood. They're beetles that attack trees, and Americans throw it away. It gives it a beautiful grain. We went and got a forest that had been burnt, and we did that. And then he also tells the stories of different people who've been important in his life. And he said that I want my office to be like a kala, like a street with casitas, and I wanted to tell the stories of my adventures. In other words, it must be like an old shoe or an old boot. And the wood we got was beautiful. So I'm showing you that although we work in Africa, every now and then we do these other adventures. And I'm going to talk about some of these projects, this one, specifically, which we're starting to do in Africa. In Rwanda, you're starting to get certain Germans who do quite good work. You're getting some Sharon Davis from New York who's catching rain and through the rain making composting toilets and compost for growing vegetables, and an Italian that comes with some ideas. But first of all, the city of Rwanda, Kigali, what's happening in Africa is what took 75 years to happen here is taking 5 years to happen there. It's becoming a little bit crazy. I mean, before I went to Pamplona, I got a phone call from a Nigerian who wants 200,000 houses. So you want to put down the phone, you say, no, look, we just do one barrio, one little barrio to show you what to do. Because there's the move for development, there's the money for development, but they don't know what to do. And what they usually do is follow the worst example that you could imagine by looking to America or South Africa for a bad interpretation of America. And we're trying to change that. So to do it, we've had to play a game where we've had to try and help the government. The president of Rwanda asked me, I was invited to head up a project to do the new government state house, and he asked me to advise the city that has 5 people that work 17 hours a day and they don't have time for thinking. But he asked me to advise them how to set up a green policy and how to start a program which is effective, a fund for environmental change. And you have to engage with these agencies. So as an architect, you have to do things much more than architecture. And you're planning for urban growth on a challenging topography, because it's like this. You can't build in the wetlands, okay? And there's a need for high density cities, okay? And the growing population, increasing urbanization, will result in increased urban areas on hilly terrain. There's a risk of flooding. So how do you come up with best practice? And this is what governments are looking at. They've got South Africans that want to come and sell them this. At 35 units per hectare, you can't do it. You have to be at least 100 units per hectare. So we've got the government to tell them to go home. You've got this reality with no urban growth and traffic. You've got clogged city centres. You've got parking and clogged access to on-site parking, where the car, like it happened in America, takes over and it's not planned for, and then you put up a big tower and you've got more cars but no infrastructure. And then this is built by the Chinese in Angola. It's been standing for 2 years unoccupied because no one can afford to occupy it. So you get big mistakes. And you look in aghast at these big mistakes, and then you have this other reality. And then the next thing, this developer comes and he builds here, and then he gets these people to work for nothing, and then gradually these become towers. But this gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's part of the reality. So where do you begin? And you have this disparity between the one thing and the other thing. And we know when you do this that there's no attention to the public realm. It's a bit like buildings in China. 81% of the people in development will completely depend on urban infrastructure for food, water, and air. If a child doesn't get washed once a day, you're going to have sickness. So your needs are very, very different. You have to prioritize in a different way. You have to deal with garbage, and you have to deal with services. So where do you start? And then you have materials. This is clay bricks dried in the sun and then burnt in an informal, low-capacity construction industry. You have good bricks, but there's not enough capacity, and and you've got to increase the capacity. If we get the go-ahead for the State House, which is a $40 million project, it will give enough capacity to kickstart the local building industry. And then you have the Singaporeans coming and selling this dream to these people. And you know it's wrong. Okay? So sometimes you've got to let them burn their fingers and then come back to you and say, we made a big mistake. And then they come with these terrible materials. They had beautiful materials. They've got natural rock. And the reliance on imported low-quality concrete. And we all know that concrete is 8% of all man-made CO2 produced is concrete. And then we also know that when you have a look at the different types of fuels that you've got to have, and then you have a look that everything comes to Mombasa, and then it has to go across 2 countries that are corrupt, either that way or this way, 2 countries. So by the time the materials arrive here, it's 5 to 7 times the price, and it's unsuitable. And the shortest route is 1,000 kilometers, and greenhouse gas emissions from one truckload is equivalent to 1,000 light bulbs. So you start looking at these figures, and you realize that you actually have to build a local building industry. Then you've got the Congo opposite, where there's indigenous trees that are not replaceable resources. So you try and actually have a look at what happens in the world. And then what happens is you avoid materials that pollute. And then you get a little project. This is a little project that we've got through a British initiative. It's a cricket pavilion, and we're busy building this at the moment. It follows the path of a bouncing ball. It's part of a fund drive by the British. We couldn't convince the president and the ministers to use a material that was made of la terre, because when you deal with a new democracy, you have aspirations. Everybody wants the Porsche showroom in Stuttgart, or they want Dubai, because to them it says we are successful. So, they said, well, why are you using a material of peasants? So what we had to do is we had to go, the chairman of the cricket board is David Cameron, so we had to have dinner at 10 Downing Street with the Rwandan ambassador, and now it's okay to use la terre. So what I'm trying to tell you, those are the games you have to play. And there it is. And we have 2 cricket fields, and we have this sports facility, an entrance gate, and some other facilities. And it follows the path of the bouncing ball. It learns from the Catalans. It fits in with the landscape. And most importantly, we also realize that if we're going to make the tile technology just from hand press with 5% cement, okay, and using not unskilled labor, using unemployed labor. So people who have no jobs, so you have to train them, and within 2 weeks you tackle a vault that size. And then we realize we have big rains. In 1 hour you get more rain than you get here in a month, and it's a problem. So what do you do with that? And we've had to work with enlightened people as to how underneath the sports field we deal with the water in a proper way, because water is a resource. Now that's one material, that's la terre. The second material we're looking at is timber, which is locally grown, and it's a eucalyptus. And we've got an Italian who married a local woman, and we're building a 5-story tower out of local timber using 2 or 3 simple details as a renewable resource. And then we found a German who's got a system where he grows hay locally, and then for 9 million euros he brought his machine to Rwanda, and he's making boards that are 6 centimeters thick. 2 of these boards on top of one another make a good floor. It's very good insulation. It has German and British approval, and suddenly we can build 3-story housing at 40% saving. So on the one hand, you look at creating labor-intensive work. On the other hand, you look at how can you find renewable resources which can empower you for what you're doing. The name of this product is StrawTech. We're just starting to build with it. And as you see here, it becomes a project like that. Our Catalonian, Anton, worked on these. These are his renderings. And then we have Rwanda, the land of 1,000 hills, and the city which is starting to mushroom, but there's no time for making the right decisions, and how do you do that? And I said to the president, I hope you don't think I'm presumptuous, but I think you should pause and ask, what does it mean to be Rwandan? And he said, it's interesting you say that, because when Bill Clinton was here, he was very complimentary about what we've done since our genocide in '94 to rehabilitate, on the one hand, the reconciliation, which is an emotional and spiritual thing, and on the other hand, the economic and infrastructure growth. And he said to Bill Clinton, have you got criticism? And Bill Clinton said, yes, development's going to become, and if you don't stop and ask what does it mean to be Rwandan, you are going to become anonymous. You're going to become like Singapore. You're going to become like somewhere else. And they're starting to do that. I've just been to give a lecture to the ministers. And to be Rwandan, it has to do with, I don't think this is working, it has to do with volcanoes. It has to do with the money you get from tourism. These are not Rwandans, these are gorillas, but it makes a lot of money for tourism. You have incredible water resources. You have incredible, every square inch is agriculture, and you filter the water so you don't have erosion. You have a lake which has methane, which is an energy source, which can be dangerous, but it can be used. You have beautiful boats where you put lanterns on either end, they attract the fish, and then you pick them up. And then you have the place of the kings, which is built out of grass, which is a traditional way, but you don't know how to interpret that in a contemporary way. So we designed a state house, which I can't show because it's classified. I can just show a model. This is the residence of the president. This is the guest residence. This is the council chamber. This is the place of governance. And the whole thing is organized around a sustainable system of renewable energy and low carbon. And it is inspired by the landscape, which is a quilt, and it's inspired by the hilltops, a landscape that does that. We've just put in a tender after 10 years later, to actually get it built. We're waiting to hear. And then what I do in these situations, I go and look what the peasants do. I have a look at how resourceful they are, how they locate their buildings with the public space on top of the hill, how they catch the rainwater so that's a renewable resource to their villages, and how they have an internal enclosure. And then one thing I do is, although I practice, as a former academic, I run master courses. So this is a master course I did with Arkansas University in America, where I brought 10 students to Africa, to Rwanda, to work with 10 students who are first generation architects. The school is very new. And what we did is we looked at building barrios, okay? This is my saying, a house is not a home unless it's a village. How could we convince the government that if you were building for poor people at 225 units per hectare, there were lessons to be learned? And we went into the city and we looked what Africans do when they move to the city on slopes, how they locate themselves. We studied this so that we could see the rural situation and we could also see the urban situation. And then we realized the importance of language. If you lose your language, you lose your culture. I don't have to tell you as Catalans the importance of language. But it's important when you're working with people to realize that the front door means family. The patio, what does it mean in their language? What are the different words that they have? And if you use their words, it gives them a sense of identity. And then what we did is we looked at the sloping topography. We made sites that were 1 hectare square. We then looked at a network of multiple centers with transit plazas, commercial shared use over here, transit plaza over there, draining the water down towards the wetland. And we looked at a cross-section of life. We looked at resilience of the neighborhood system, its capacity to sustain distribution and distress of water. And then we looked at urban gardening, and then we looked at how you could, maybe the government could come along and they build this and the people do the housing. I'll just go through this very, very quickly. And then more recently we got this project to do, 3,000 houses. And what we did here, we looked at how do you build a vibrant new density mixed-use development with a variety of types and size of dwelling. A sustainable community with a wealth of civic and community functions. And you've got to explain to the government and to the developers that housing is about a barrio, and only 2 or 3 things are housing. The other thing is is health and education, and the other thing is public space, because they don't want to counter that into the equation. And then we looked at how we could integrate it with the greenway system, working with the city, who doesn't have capacity. So what happens when I do those projects with other universities, we use it as a research program. And it's one of the things I'm saying to universities around the world, including Spain. You should be doing certain projects that work with the city that are real, so you become the research laboratory for your city. Because that way you introduce students, everybody benefits. And then we looked at how we made different barrios, okay? And how we could, the pedestrian could be here and the car could just come on the outside. And we looked at different housing types, and we looked at how there was connectivity between the barrios and what that would mean in terms of courtyard housing and three-story housing. Now remember, these people have never lived in an urban situation, unlike yourselves. They're first generation. So how do you make it into something that's appealing at a density of, in this particular case, a density of 120 units per hectare? And what we did is we looked at how African cultures work, and then we used best practice from Europe that we're familiar with. And now with my Pamplona project, we've got Spanish students making an input. And this is how you build. And then occasionally in Addis Ababa, we get a different project to do. And I just threw this in very quickly. It's a project that someone approached us to do, which provides activities in dense urban areas where the children haven't got anything to do, the parents don't know where to go, so it's a multi-use center. But I'll just skip that at the moment because I'd rather get back to the housing. And what we were doing was taking these lessons we had learned from what the peasants do and showing that if we integrate it and we leave the corners open, we can start giving them a sense of public space which is not alienating. And it can also fit relative to the landscape. And so those are the ideas, the bird's eye view of the courtyard spaces and the fact that the courtyards link through so you can move through like this. And I took the students in Pamplona and I made them go into the old town and I made them go into the new housing. And some of the new housing works well and some of it doesn't work well. And we had a look at why. And this is the Ijipango. That's the name for patio, public patio. There's another name for a private patio. So you use people's language. And then more recently, we've just won this housing competition 2 weeks ago. We were given this greenfield site, and we used the same lessons we had learned from before. But here we're designing for poorer people. We've got rooms of 4 meters by 4 meters. We're designing 3-bedroom units and 2-bedroom units. We've got this idea of linking the public space. And the Irembo, which is the outside courtyard, the Ijipango, which is the inner courtyard, the Ikikari, which is the private courtyard. And it's very important to use people's language when you describe those things. And then we showed how it can sit on the site, and it's ground floor plus 4 stories. So what does that mean? Good streets, shade and pedestrian friendly, pavements to contain pockets of shade and parking. So we're trying to do this as an example to the government of an attempted best practice, and if it gets built, let it become the yardstick so that developers and people can see that you can have a good environment and you can have a return on your money. And then what we did is the pedestrian greenways run through, and then you have an inner green court over here. So you neutralize the burden of becoming urban too quickly. And there's the contours, how you read the contours. Now if you take the roads traversing and you take these traversing going at the diagonal across the contours, it means you can walk easier. And then we looked at low impact design and peri-urban agriculture, how we can turn that into it. And what's going to happen in reality is the Rwandan office, which is Tim Hall and Anton Larson, are doing the housing, and I'm doing my Johannesburg office is doing all the public buildings. So we find different ways of working. And suddenly I have to work in a collaborative way with respected colleagues because we believe in working small. No office is ever bigger than 5 people, but if we get together, we can be 8 people or 12 people. I've got 2 sons who are architects. They've gone on their own, and we can collaborate with them. So suddenly, we're looking at low-impact design. How can we filter the water, especially the heavy rain when it comes, okay? And the courtyards. How can there be active external spaces, flat, accessible, and functional courtyards with orchards, creches, playgrounds? You can have different uses in them. So it becomes a neighborhood. It becomes a barrio. And there we are, grouping it around. There's the idea of the diagonal. So what I'm trying to say is, one of the ideas learned from my African spatial studies comes into the project, and then it runs through as a theme. And then I've just run a master class with the Aalto School of Architecture in Helsinki, where I was the guest professor, and we took public buildings. And what we did there, we invited 10 students, again to work with 10 local students, and we went and looked at the real urban fabric of Kigali. And remember, these people are all threatened with removal, and the government has made a policy to remove them because the land is very strategic to the outskirts of the city. And what we did is we had the master class. We had the students from 5 students assigned to one site, another 5 students assigned to another site. And what you have to do is you have to do with a proper process. I have to go and negotiate with the city, with the mayor, with the government, that what we're doing is a piece of research. It's not going to end up with a building, but it's a piece of research that the city can't do, and it will enable the urban planners in the city to have an example of an attempted best practice done by a number of minds in a particular situation. And the community and local authority engagement and support of the current policy of the city and permanent relocation of urban indigent, that's poor people, to new villages on the periphery of the city, giving them schools and good schooling and hospitals in advance. And the choice of 2, Umudugudu means village. This one is semi-urban one and another one. The process of research and learning in a culture which is not your own. And that's what I've been saying to students in Pamplona. You need to go back to where you come from, and be it Latin America or Chile or Buenos Aires or wherever you are. And you need to, as young professionals, you need to engage with communities and create your own work. Architects don't just have to have the wealthy serving them, because if you engage, and you also need to engage with the way you get paid. And Nelson Mandela said, what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, it is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the lives we lead. And I'm trying to say to young students, we've got 96% of the world needs us. Not just the 4% that are wealthy, and you have incredible skills as an architect. So you can serve both communities. And we started working, and we started walking, we started learning and looking. And then we went and engaged with one of the communities. I can send you a link on this. It's a book now. I'll send it to Gemma, and you can, I'm only just showing a portion of it. And what we did is, the Helsinki students learned one thing in Africa. The one constant is uncertainty. Nothing is certain. We come from societies in the West where there's a certain degree of certainty. And Doshi said to me, in India, certainty breeds its own paranoia, whereas life is actually uncertain. And what happened here, we had a whole lot of enlightened lectures, but when the plan was just done by a land surveyor who knew nothing about town planning. So what we did is we changed certain things on the town plan to make it work better. And then the students, 5 of the students each had to do a project which was based on a real program, which had to do with sport here, it had to do with training and building there, it had to do with facilities allied to the Catholic Church over here, and it had to do with certain facilities that were related to women and disabled. And the outcome of it is this book, which in January we're going to present to the mayor, and we're going to show him and the urban planners. This is the training center, that there's what the students came up with, and then this is the sports center that one of the students came up with, where he said it's not just a basketball field or a football field, it's the facilities that go around it. There's a good chance that some of these projects might be realized, because there's an art foundation in Helsinki which is quite keen that a selected project gets built if they can broker it. And then when you go to the other site, Niorenzi, this is the standard. I think it's beautiful. It looks as though Spaniards designed it. It's beautiful. And it's a lean-to roof. It takes the rain away and it gives you cover as a colonnade. This is what the people do. It's their standard. And then the other site is onto a wetland, and it's much more urban. And what's going to happen? At the moment, there's nothing there. But in 3 years, it'll be like this, whether you're involved or whether you're not involved. So there's a need for architects. There's instant cities happening, and it doesn't help you to go to Rutgers University or to Harvard or to a development course in London, because they don't teach you about instant cities. These are instant cities. So you have to just be wide awake on your feet. And one of the students came up with a beautiful project. This is a project for UNICEF done by Toma Berlanda, an architect from Venice, who works in East Africa, and he's now just been made the head of the School of Architecture in Cape Town. But the student did a much better scheme than him. He actually has one entrance, a second entrance, a third entrance, and a fourth entrance to very different uses. And some of these uses have to do with HIV/AIDS, they have to do with you don't want to be seen by somebody else. And then he has a very beautiful staircase which separates the different levels of the courtyards. It's the one picture I wanted to put in, but I didn't have it. Now I slip back to my practice, Peter Rich Architects. This has nothing to do with Light Earth. What happened in Johannesburg in '94, imagine you're in Barcelona and you go away on holiday. Now, under apartheid, African people were not allowed to live in the city unless you were the gastarbeiters, the cleaning staff. You could live on the roof. And they were all Zulus. And the Africans were housed in dormitory cities that were supposed to be there but then disappear sometime. They haven't. They've become big urban areas. And when '94 came, Africans occupied the city. It's a little bit like you going away from Barcelona, all of you, and you go away for 6 weeks and you come back, and Algeria has occupied the entire city. They've occupied the museum, where you go to the doctor, where you go with your mother to have chocolate and churro, and the schools of architecture, and this building. You come in here and this is full of Africans. They're sleeping here, and you say, well, what do we do? That happened in Johannesburg, and what happened is the Europeans, who are a mixture of Dutch, German, Bulgarian, Russian, English, they fled to this place, and they took the stock exchange and they built a piece of America. It's like Houston. It's really boring. And what happens is 3 kilometers away, there's this area here where I've been working. Now, it's a little bit like a piece of Palestine caught in Israel, because it's an apartheid settlement where there's infrastructure for 70,000 people, but there's over 500,000 people. So you can imagine what happens with human waste. And then there was a presidential project in 2000 to upgrade it. And it's hidden behind all this industrial. So people going to Johannesburg and Pretoria, it doesn't really exist. Now, I've been working here, and it's become part of my life. And on the 7th of January, we've got the money to complete this project. Okay? It's a cultural center. It tells the story of the people. It has an archive for jazz. It has all sorts of community facilities, and this is the context. And it has true participatory involvement. We won this on a heritage contract, and the heritage contract was for us to do something for tourists here. We said, no. We want to tell the story of Africans. And the British are very arrogant. I had to learn when I was a student. We brought up as Christian Judaic, and if you're British, anything that's not British doesn't exist, even when we had the World Architecture Festival here, they didn't know how to deal with the Spanish unless they'd had one bottle of whiskey. So it's their problem. And we were the first people that came and said, you must stop applying heritage rules that a building is good if you save it if it's over 60 years. What about asking Africans what's important to them? And different things are important to them. Now, Mandela stayed in this room in 1942. It was the first time when he had been a herdsman, herding cattle, and he had gone to school, and then he had gone through the rite of passage, which is a circumcision rite which you go through when you're 17, where from a boy you become a man. And then he came to the city, and he wrote about the wonderful time he had. And what we did is we declared the various yards which had grown organically a heritage area. And this is what I do. I go with a measuring tape on my own, and I start measuring up the public space, and then I get friendly with the people, and I go inside the house, and I document the furniture, and then they hold the tapes, and then I become their friends, their amigo, and now I'm invited to all of their weddings and funerals. Most weekends I have at least one to go to. And then I document which of the buildings that were built between the world wars, Africans who went and fought with the South African troops against Rommel in the desert. And then I look at the defensible space, okay, the verandas, the fences, how you build that little bit of space which gives you privacy. And what do people do with cars? What do they do with their washing? And how do they negotiate space? The government promised every African that as a second constitutional right, we will give you a house and a piece of land that's 250 square meters. It's not possible to do that. And then you start comparing that density with other densities. And then what happened here was quite a nice story. I have 3 sons. 2 are architects, and 1 is into coffee. And as you know, young boys are like monkeys. I'm still a monkey. And when they were young, they went and got some weights, and they did this every day for 3 weeks. And they thought when they next went out for a cerveja, maybe a girl will notice them. Nothing happened. Okay? And then the weights got rusty. And then I noticed some artists, African artists, who were smoking a lot of marijuana. And I went and gave them the weights. And they got their picture in the newspaper. And a South African who was Mr. Universe is the trainer of Arnold Schwarzenegger. He sent the picture to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Arnold Schwarzenegger gave them a gym. And now, Richard Branson, who's the head of Virgin Atlantic, is very interested in this. Now he's going to give them a whole gym. I'm telling you how you make work, okay? And what's happened is I've got a lawyer firm that wants to do pro bono teaching of Africans of business skills, and Richard Branson is their client, so we're going to get the gym. So I'm just trying to show you, by engaging with communities, all sorts of things happen, and they don't happen in the normal way by who you know. They happen in a different way. And I'm trying to tell the students that. And when you go into these courtyards, you can see the grey water, the washing, the dirty washing from the food. There's nowhere for it. This is a communal toilet, which is shared by 10 families. Okay? Actually, I think there are 2 of them. It's shared by 5 families. What we're doing now is with this new money we're getting, I want to upgrade this. I want to give the people individual toilets. I want to do double story here with lightweight construction, give people individual toilets, improve the quality of life. It's a very good model because you always have someone controlling the entrance and 10 families. The government wants to pull this down, but it's actually a very good model, 10 families. But what's happened is they've now transferred ownership, and they've transferred ownership to one person. So it's going to be, the dynamic's going to be very interesting. When you look what people do and you go into their lives, poverty is relative. If you're from India, this is not poverty. You know, they've got a stove, they've got a TV, they've got a refrigerator. So poverty is relative. Here I am coming back from a funeral in a double-decker bus. The people, most Africans are Christians. Diane, my wife, and I have been to a religious ceremony where we're the only white people and we have 10 million people in the audience over the hills. So it's another reality. But it's Old Testament, New Testament, and their own belief. It's a little bit like Latin America. And when you die, you don't go to the police, you kill an ox, and you put a tent up, and the person lies in state, and then you feed everybody when you come back from the funeral. And here's my building waiting to be completed. We had 3 government agencies. And every time the government agency got a new boss, the new boss didn't want to do what the old boss did, so the building stood for 3 years. And not one brick was taken because the people were involved in the making. They feel it's theirs. There's a building that got the Lubetkin Prize in Port Elizabeth. The Lubetkin Prize is a big deal with the British. It was a struggle museum with government money. It didn't have the right community interface because it was a political agenda. And the people are busy dismantling the building at the moment. So if you don't have the buy-in of the stakeholders of the people, they will dismantle it completely. And then what happened is, Mandela said to me, he said, Peter, if you're going to build a museum, tell the story of the people. Don't tell my story. Enough people have done that. So we needed a site. So we had to organize in a proper way, how do you take the families that live here and you give them a better life? You give them new housing for nothing. And their children can go to school. And how do you get the authorities to broker that? When we first went into the community, we counted 35 families. It soon became 76 families because people are politicized. And then it ended up in the end being about 45 families. And we started building our building. And what we were doing was the public space is the kale, okay? We were making here piazzas or plazas, which are slightly raised to give privacy. We're creating a building that's a bridge so that when downstairs you have shopping and training centers and food court. Then when you come up the ramp, you have beginning, middle and end, past, present and future with a bridge, and then you have other training facilities over here. So it became a gateway. And you also have the idea of street and the quality of street. So what are you working with? And there it is. And what happened is, after 94, you got a lot of squatters that came and their density increased. And there's Mandela's room. And this person here won't move until they give her a new house. So that has been brokered. And soon, when you come as a tourist, you go and visit Mandela's room. Then you come up and you move through our building and you learn about the history of the community. Then you come down a staircase and you walk in and you see how the people live, and you eat food and you go and drink beer and you go here with me to watch Barca beating Real Madrid. And this is the plan of the building. It's almost like an extension of the street, and when you're in the building you can look into the community, and then there's several levels that happen. When you get at the end, you come out and you walk in, and then we're doing a pavilion over here. I've just done 75 details, just finishing the steel. And I was looking at a retractable stair, And my son said to me, Daddy, you're really struggling with this. You need to look at Lina Barbadi. She's got a beautiful solution. So we've done that. But the language is translucent sheeting. All the other work is infill work has to be done by unskilled labor with gender equality and age equality, creating work for unemployed people. And it's a condition of the government. So you build a steel structure, and then you allow certain things to be done by local people. And there's the new staircase, which is retractable. It can pull up so that you don't get children coming up at night on the high balcony. And this is the context that you're working in. And when the people move through the exhibition, they become the actors for the street. So we now have the money, and in 7 months' time, this project will be occupied. We're looking at the right stakeholder involvement, and we're looking at how these people can start becoming beneficiaries of a new economic incentive, not just from tourism, but from getting special advice. And the lessons that you learn is, this is not just stairs, it's also an amphitheater, okay? And this is what the people do. They make the pointing black. You're not doing this for an architectural magazine. You're doing it so that the people can have something they like. And you look at the detailing of your back. It has to be tough. And then these are people who can't afford rent, and they're going to be part of the reality. They're going to come, and they're going to become on the edge of your building. They're going to be selling their wares. So don't exclude them. Keep them there. And if you have a community meeting, you can have it over here. And then we're going to have a projector here which projects onto a screen over here, which is external. So at night you can have educational movies, and with some LED lighting, it can become very colorful and a nice place to be. But you want the people to have ownership of the building. So you run art programs, and you put an advert out, and you've got a Dutch person who fuses glass. So that's what you do. And there's a sort of honesty of how it's made. And, the detailing, the balustrade, children are going to hang on it. They're going to climb on it. So what can you do? You make it beautiful. And then you notice that the people get the leftover tiles of the affluent society, and they turn it into Piet Mondrian. And what we've got here is, for very little money, we can get the marble and the granite from the rich people with their bathrooms and their kitchens. And then we run different games of different people who've been part of the heritage. You get them to become kids again and to tell their story, and then you cast it into a thing. And these are people coming back from church, which is part of their thing. And that's the Alex story. Then our little practice. We're little guys, and we stay little guys. We believe that, because as soon as you get bigger than a certain size, you become a manager, and I don't want to pay students to do what I enjoy doing. And we entered a project for the capital city of South Sudan, which is here in Bor. We noticed that there's an 8-kilometer stretch from the Nile, the White Nile, to over a wetland. And then what we did is we looked at the heritage, and we defined this. This is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. And I was in Merida in the Yucatan, and I was measuring up Spanish squares and things to get the right size. And the idea is that you build a barrier, and then you put the public buildings in between. It's not different to the idea we've used elsewhere. Okay? And there's a line that goes across Africa. It starts with I've got another lecture. It starts with the Sphinx looking down Africa, and the Egyptians, and remember that our own religions come 12 times removed from the sun god, the sun god Ra, if you look at the Christian Judaic religions. And a few years ago, we got the thematic master plan to do for Axum, the most ancient city south of the Sahara in northern Tigray. And it was very interesting because it's 3,500 years ago. It's before the Old Testament, before the New Testament, before the Muslim faith, and how they borrowed from one another. But what the Egyptians believed is that the Nile and the Milky Way formed a line that went down Africa, and it finishes at Phoenix, at Durban, at the ashram of Gandhi, because Gandhi learnt everything about his passive way of resistance from when he was jailed in Africa. So we're finding that we're getting projects along that line, and we're also getting projects along the Rift Valley, which I'll talk about in a moment. We've just been awarded the contract to, this is Ngorongoro crater, that is 10 kilometers. These are other craters. This is an active volcano. And in Tanzania, there's Olduvai Gorge is here, and at Laetoli over here, there's evidence of 3.6 million year old footprints in the lava of our ancestors who were hominins standing upright. Okay? And we won the contract. And I signed the contract. This is looking down, this is 3 weeks ago when we were there looking down into it. And then while we were in the crater, we saw this kill of a pride of lions. And the active volcano in 2006, this is the volcano going off. This is the ash. This is what happens, and it can happen again. This is the reality, and everything you do is having to take cognizance of seismic. And these are the footprints that are left behind when that happens. And when they get discovered, it causes a lot of excitement. These are the footprints on our site. And what happened is, this is erosion, and this is a black soil. It's cotton soil. It absorbs water, and you can't build on it because it expands. So we had to find the geology of that. And then we had to do excavations. And what happened is we work with the local Maasai. And what we're doing is getting their opinion, because they have beliefs that, like Christian beliefs, are in conflict with the theory of evolution, but we need to tell their story also. And when you go there, these are the Maasai who are hunter-gatherers. They're still they're pastoralists. It's cattle. It's the Hadza people who are nearby who are hunter-gatherers, and they're still hunter-gatherers. And this is our site. It's an eroded site. Over here, this road was put in for the president, and it hurts the landscape, and we must take it away. And these are the examples of local settlements when you fly over. It's all got to do with cattle wealth. It's got to do with the fact that cattle are your money, and when you marry a girl, or you trade in cattle. So it has to do with wives for cattle. It's an ancient, different way of dealing with things in Africa. And these are my sketches looking down. The Getty Foundation covered the footprints. It's very controversial because by covering the footprints, they've created a microclimate which makes it delicious for the ants and the roots, and they're damaging the footprints, and the president has asked for the footprints to be made available to the world, not to be covered for a bunch of scientists. And what I've had to do is play politics for 18 months, because if the president had his agenda to create which was my contract, which is to create a controlled environment, climatically controlled environment over these by the end of this coming year, he would have alienated the paleontological world and the money. So I've had to go and find a Tanzanian who is a professor in America, who's married to a German, to talk to the president because he can't get fired, and explain to the president that we need to get UNESCO and scientists at a meeting which we had 2 weeks ago between me going to Pamplona, and we need to get their buy-in and guidance, and we need to reverse the thing. We need to do the educational buildings first and do this building last. This is the site. And then we tried to show, how can we put our footprints down? This is process. And then we got a project here where we said, well, we can do the museum, and the museum will tell a story of hominins and Homo sapiens, and then we need research entities, and then maybe we need educational facilities, because everybody said to us, the excavations in future are there, there's nothing here. Until we started excavating here, and we've now just here found an even more important find than the original find. And now the Americans are wanting to throw money at this thing. So instead of a $7 million failure, it becomes a $100 million success. And it becomes 5 museums, not just one. And this was an attempt to design a research compound where the sort of places where you eat and where you do research and where you store your research and where where the director sleeps. And then you're trying to say to them, you need to make a village. And this is the museum. An initial idea for the museum is to build a retaining wall here, because this is the black earth, so that you prevent the water coming in and damaging. And you put the museum above the ground, and you have a series of light vaults that come in. And when you come down a ramp here inside a cairn, this is where the restaurant is, this is where the toilets are. And then you go through an exhibition that deals with Gondwana land. And what happens here is, when I present to the client, the brief we had to fill in, I was in Cambridge, I was made a fellow of a college in Cambridge, and I had to fill in this competition. There was no brief and there was no money. There was just professionals at man hours per month. It's like the World Bank. It drives you crazy. And I'm not very good on computers, so I worked on this thing, and I got hold of a student in Tanzania to direct me to an archaeologist who the gods guided him to the best guy. And we have this fantastic team. And then you come in here and you have the story of Gondwana land. You have Africa, where you had Latin America wrapped around Africa. You had Australia and India, and then they moved away. And then you have the story of the Rift Valley, and it's from Antarctica into Israel, and all the finds that have ever been found, and then the importance of the 2 finds. And then you go into the Cathedral of the Footprints, and then you come out the other end and you get DNA and the new dating techniques. And then you go into Homo sapiens, the various tribes that have occupied the land as far back as we know, and the living Hadza people, the Cush people from the Bible, the Maasai people, their world's view of evolution, the Christian world's view of evolution, which, as we know from Linnaeus, is in contrast to and when you leave, and then what we've decided to do is we have no electricity, because it's in the middle of everywhere. Everything is done through performance and through puppets. And I don't know if you saw the Warhorse, which is a play that's going around the world. It's a puppet company in Cape Town who we hope to be working with. But this is just Procesos, and we were doing it like this, and then I said, there's a problem. These things are too long. And then these were done just 2 weeks ago here, 25th of the 11th. We've chosen new sites, far removed from the archaeological site for the research centers. And I'm trying to come up with a very beautiful architecture that's made out of the ground, which just sits here beautifully. And there's a fantastic change in level that happens here. And maybe the research buildings the education buildings, but you can also just put some very gentle seating here, and you can have your education under the tree. It hasn't always got to be architecture. So there's the museum. Now we built these, we proposed some buildings here, and they found important finds. Now we've pulled everything back to the end here, and I've got to go home and design 3 research buildings. I've got to design education buildings, and I've got to do accommodation for 60 school children and students who come to study here. And then we realized, this is in London, the Catalans were in London too, that we really should use this system, because what it does is it gives us 10 meters by 15 meters, and it gives us a slit which we can actually control the light. And I was going to put drawings, I've got them on my iPhone, but I didn't know how to do it. We've got what it does is it gives us point loads, and UNESCO were very pleased that only 3% of the area has bearing on the ground. So we can float above the ground. So this is where we are now, thanks to the Catalans, you know. Thank God for the Catalans. and we're still learning. And then just to conclude, we're raising the money, we're getting there, we're doing the first women's museum in Africa that deals with the feminine principle, the nurturing feminine principle, in the Valley of 1,000 Hills near Durban. When an African woman gets buried, she traditionally got buried in this position in a pot. Okay? So pots are very important. A woman is the carrier of life. A pot is the carrier of food and water. And then you've also got the egg. So if you're looking for something that deals with the feminine principle, the idea here is that you come in, and this is an exhibition for, they're about A4 size. They're embroideries. They're embroideries that are tell the story of 3,000 women's struggle, their struggles in life. Not always political. Sometimes it's with men or whatever, but it tells their struggle. And the idea is that you ramp down and then you go through an ambulatory, which is the archive. We're getting there. It's not easy. We got government money, but then the government wanted to grab the control of the project, so we didn't sign the contract. We're now dealing with national government, not with provincial government, because they were using it for political gain. And we wanted to be a center that doesn't just deal with women, it deals with nature as part of women and endangered species as well. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm saying to my students, you take on things that are impossible, but if you're prepared to stay with the program and you're prepared to drive it, you can create incredible win situations. Now I just get back in closing to Rwanda. There's no building industry. People don't know how to build a double-story house, let alone a three-story house. And when I went to Rwanda, there were these beautiful Roman tiles. You know the tiles that are made on your thigh, they're narrow here, they're Spanish tiles, Roman tiles. The whole landscape of peasants was covered in tiles. It looked like ancient China. Someone came from the EU or from America and said, you have to stop this because the kilns are being fired by a non-renewable resource. They stopped it, and now the landscape is corrugated iron, cheap zinc from China. It looks terrible. It obviously doesn't do what it's meant to do. It's cold in winter and it's hot in summer. And what we've done is we've convinced we've shown the government that you have the waste from rice, which you can feed the kilns. So we've started the industry again. And what I'm trying to say to you is you can be a small guy, but you can bring about big change. And that's what we're trying to do in Rwanda. And we seem to be winning. And we didn't get the church built because they didn't believe it would stand up. We're getting that built. We're getting that built. This, I think, is going ahead. This is a school, and some housing is going ahead. We're trying to get this to happen in the city. But what we're doing is we're making sustainability part of everything we do, not as a flag that you fly. We do it that it's just normal and good practice to do that. And then I just want to finish with one thing. Ray Cappy, he's 88. He started the school of COAC he got really tired of the fighting that was going on in the architectural school one day when he was young, and he and some friends went and had coffee. Then they bought a shed and they started an architectural school. But independent of that, he's done a wonderful house that he built. And when we were with him recently, he was asked what he thought were the 10 most important principles to make a successful architect, planner, and educator. And I'm just going to share them with you. We discussed this with the students. Think positively, not negatively. Number 2, accept structure and order, but know that it is to be questioned and broken where necessary. We all do that as architects. We can't work without order, but it's also nice to know when to break it. Always be willing to explore, experiment, and invent, and do not accept the status quo. We've given our profession away in the English-speaking world by accepting the status quo. You don't need to do it. I had a student from Jordan who said, I don't know what to do in Jordan because the developers are the ones who, they've got this housing and the people like it and it's all they do. I said, go and study the housing, send it to me, and then I want you to do a critique of it, and then I want you to do better housing so the developer can make more money and it's a nicer house for the people. Then you're winning. Don't say no. Know yourself and keep your work consistent with who you are and how you think. I mean, you as Catalans and you as Spaniards, you're an inspiration to the whole world. You have the best architecture in the world, okay? And and you might have tough times now, but it's only because you had it so good, okay? Just remember that. You have better infrastructure here than New York or London, you know? Everything's new, it's fantastic. Maintain good moral and social values. Be humble, honest, and compassionate and egalitarian. Have conviction about your work. Believe in who you are and be proud of being Catalan. Be proud of who you are. You don't have to be like anywhere else. I think that's one of your successes as Spain, is you've come to terms with who you are, with the proud tradition of De Soto and other people, and you've built on that tradition. Be open and say yes to most ideas and requests. The good ones will be valued and the bad ones will cease to exist. Allow employees and fellow workers freedom and the ability to work to their strengths and avoid hierarchy. And the last one, very important, money should be the residual of work, not the goal, but do not compromise your worth. My sons, it's very interesting, they've gone on their own, they're in their mid-30s. They're learning how important it is the first contract you make with a client, because if your contract is one that is going to start compromising yourself from the beginning, you will not have a good building because you lose respect straight away. So it's how you fight for your worth and then prove yourself. And most of the work I do in Africa, I find I get myself into the principal role where when I explained the exhibition to the client, they asked me, what can the exhibition be? They said, well, will you be director of exhibition? I said, for sure. You understand what I mean? You have to establish the respect of the client, because the client doesn't know. And a lot of the work we do, you're like a missionary. You're actually educating your client. You have a slightly different situation because you have very often informed governance or informed local governance. And we all use Barcelona as an example of what you did through having enlightenment when you had your Olympics. You spread the good and you built society. You use that money in the most wonderful way. So you're a role model in a lot of ways. So this is what I conclude with, because I think it's a nice holistic questioning way of who we are. It's quite good to you to sit down and make your own 10 points. Thank you. Yeah, if there are any questions. Look, you've got to be slightly loco to do the work we do too. Right? It's also not. Yes.
Thank you very much for the enlightening presentation. I'm not an architect, but I happen to be interested I'm an activist and happen to be interested in urban landscaping and all. And I happen to live in South Africa, so I thought it was a good chance to come and meet your work. Just as an aside, before I make my point, we run the local Barça supporters club, just in case you're interested.
Okay.
And we watch Barça play against Madrid at the Zulik Bowling Club. But in any case, my point is that I stay in a township in Lenasia, and
Yes.
next to Johannesburg, and I stay in it's a township where the apartheid government pushed people aside, those who were considered
Or pushes Indian people aside.
Indian, so-called Indians, yeah. So this where my husband, my partner, has had a council house for 20 years. And so it happened that 3 years ago, a friend of mine, Christina, who's an architect, came to visit and stay with us during tough times. And we were thinking of removing a wall inside the house. We didn't want to extend or anything. So she came and said, no, listen, rather move your house the other way around, because council houses were made in a way that they, of course, were not thinking of comfort of people. So we had the sun in our bedrooms and not the other way around. And to cut a long story short, funny thing is that first she thought, let's see what others are doing in Indonesia. Well, people in Indonesia do whatever they want with their houses. It's just, there's a very ugly houses around there. But then
There's a lot of money also.
there's a lot of money, and there's no town.
And with money comes bad taste very often.
Very, very bad
Yeah.
taste, indeed. We run actually competitions with my partner to see who can spot the ugliest house there. And, but the one thing we did is, because we moved the house to the back, that means living room and kitchen to the back, so that we could close the backyard and the children can play there, we had to close the front door. So now one accesses, which was never actually open, we always accessed through the kitchen. So now it's a beautiful house, it's changed our life, it's the most amazing thing we've ever done, but it had one unintended consequence, which I'm linking with one of the things you raised, which is that we don't have a front door, which you were saying before, it's family, and indeed, so it happened that a few months later, I learned through my neighbor, Mozambican Muslim woman, Aisha, that my neighbor in the corner up, Sebi, is complaining because we no longer have a front door. And she's been complaining to all the neighbors in the street that how come we don't have a front door. The story is still, well, Sevi has the copy of our keys, so she's close family now, and she's seen the house and she's understood but now then we understood how important it was, you know, that a house speak to the street and as in a front door. So I could relate very much to what you were raising over Rwanda.
Yeah, what we did in Rwanda is, through their language, we learned that front door means family to them. So to them it's very important. And cooking takes place in the backyard, not in the kitchen, traditionally. But if you're living in a 3-story house, how do you do that? I'm just saying that it's not just physical context, it's cultural context. And if you're dealing with Indians, you know, the Indians in South Africa, that we've got the biggest Indian community outside of India. A lot of that comes from the villages that they were in, they bring back, but then you get the very moneyed people, and then they look at American television and everything goes out the window. And they compete with kitchens to see how many millions of euros per square meter your kitchen can cost, because then you're really successful. But that's their problem. Any other questions? Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.